Thank you all. Hey, this feels really good to be with you all and to be with some people who are real heroes to me and exemplify the public service, the courage, the leadership that we want to see more of in El Paso, more of in Texas, and more of in this country. I want to address something that I think is on everyone's mind. It was tough enough for you, Beto, to take on a sitting Republican governor in a state that last elected a Democrat to that position in 1990. Now you want to hold a town hall while the Final Four is taking place on a Saturday. What are you thinking? Here's my logic. We already won this stuff in 1966. We've been there, we've done that. Now we can focus on the future going forward. So shout out to the Texas Western Miners from 66. So Amy, who's with us up here right now, and our 3 kids joined us for their last week of spring break. Every kid's dream spring break, right? Traveling Texas with their dad, giving the same speech in the same, kind of place every night. Henry, our youngest, was giving me some constructive feedback and criticism. He's like, Dad, you go on a little bit long. You could shorten that speech a little bit. Here are the key points I think you're trying to make. You should just start with those, and that's it. But it was really good to be with them. And we were going to places, as the judge said, you get a lot of attention in Austin and in Dallas and Houston and Fort Worth and San Antonio and even the Rio Grande Valley nowadays. But when you show up in Shamrock, Texas, or Vernon, or Albany, or Childress, or Dalhart, some of these cities that we had never been to, maybe never heard of before we started traveling the state 5 years ago, it's amazing to connect with people who for so long have been written off or taken for granted. And I think we feel that sometimes in El Paso, although we are a big, proud community. Nearly 1 million people live in the county over which Judge Samaniego presides. We are so often left out of the conversation, so far from the centers of power and politics that decisions are made about us without us far too often. Well, that explains what people are going through in these different communities where we showed up. And just like we will today, I spoke a little bit at each one of these town halls across rural Texas, and then we turned the microphones over to those who were in attendance to listen to and learn from them. And it was extraordinary. And I came away, I hope, a much better candidate, much better perspective on the people of Texas. And then I arrived in El Paso very late Wednesday night, very early Thursday morning, and I've been here for the last 3 or 4 days, and it's just been extraordinary. The best time possible to be in the best city on the face of the planet. If you have not yet been outside today, you've got to go do that. I was running in the Franklin Mountains with my dog Artemis, and ran across my friends. Didn't literally run over them, but ran into them. Mario and Mariela, who were walking with their puppies. And we were under this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sky, walking through our received natural heritage, the inheritance that we got from the generations before us, that heritage that the people of El Paso chose to preserve through their representatives on the city council, in the commissioner's court, and in public meetings just like this one. It made me so proud to be from this community and to be raising people in this community. And then to listen to our county judge, who, when this city was going through arguably its toughest time. We were the deadliest city in America at the depths of that pandemic. We set up not 1, but 10 mobile morgues in the city of El Paso. And this guy was not just fighting for us to save our lives, he also had to fight the most powerful person in the state of Texas at the time, who was trying to constrain his ability to protect the public health and literally keep us alive. And he did so no matter the obstacles or the odds. He took his charge of public service seriously, and he could care less whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, that you're in El Paso, that you're an American, that you're a human being is all that matters to him. And he's done an extraordinary job leading this county. So Judge, thank you for your service, for what you represent for us. And then, I don't know what I could say about Jessica except for get on board or get out of the way. An absolute force of nature. I don't want to go too deep into her story, for obvious reasons. But I will just tell you, she was also injured on the 3rd of August in 2019, doing her best to be there for her kids and for her husband, Memo, who was grievously injured in that same attack. And I got to be with her and Karina and Memo Jr. so many times in that hospital room in Del Sol. And this woman, more than the machines, and with all due respect, more than the doctors and the medical providers who were doing extraordinarily heroic work, she was keeping Memo going, talking to him constantly, giving him updates on the Cowboys and the football games that were taking place, making sure that he had every ounce of fight in him, focused on staying alive and being there for her kids, and also for himself. Man, it was so inspiring to me. And I took so much from that, learned so much from her courage, her leadership, her tenacity, her perseverance in the face of something that none of us ever wants to go through, much less can even imagine right now. We also shared a fondness for the occasional Budweiser michelada, which I would smuggle into the public meeting area at Del Sol. Just a wonderful human being. And, you know, she was, I think, trying to make me look good in front of everyone here. Really, it's Jessica who so often is reaching out to me. Hey, Beto, are you doing okay? How are you holding up? I know that campaign trail can be tough. I know you're away from your family. I just want you to know I'm thinking about you. And I got to tell you, Jessica, that really keeps me going. That really pushes me forward. And that really reminds me why we are in this fight and what we have an opportunity to do together. Thinking about Jessica and Memo and this community and what we experienced in 2019. I think so much of the explanation for it, and there are many things that we could talk about, comes down to us and who we are, and whether or not we have the courage and willingness to share our story with the rest of the world. Because when we don't, the rest of the world ends up sharing its story about us and defining who we are to everyone else, including the people who actually live here. Are we this dangerous, dusty, dirty little corner of West Texas that has to be walled up and fenced off and protected from all those people who are coming to get us? Or are we, as the judge just said, this extraordinary place on the planet that is connected with another city, forming the largest binational community anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, a home to hundreds of thousands of refugees and asylum seekers, not just those who are coming right now from the Northern Triangle of Central America, or coming from Haiti or Cuba or Brazil, or from wherever on the planet they originated, but the city that welcomed the O'Rourkes 5 generations ago, coming, fleeing famine in Ireland, 2 million of them coming to this country, coming to our maritime borders, showing up penniless, speaking a strange language in some cases, part of a culture that was somewhat alien to the rest of this country, inciting a lot of fear and anxiety. Those O'Rourkes found a home right here in El Paso, Texas. And I would like to think, whether it is the Lebanese community, the Nigerian community, the Mexican community, those from all over the planet who have chosen us, I know that they have made us better by their very presence, stronger and yes, safer, one of the safest cities in the United States of America today. There is nothing but pride that I have for this community and what we represent, not just to ourselves, but to this country and to this state at this moment. And I'm so grateful that I can share Jessica's story and Judge Samaniego's story and the story of El Paso around the state of Texas, because I think it is so instructive for the big things that we want to do together right now. And let me lay a few of those on you. And then again, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you and have a chance to listen to you as well. So as I travel the state, listening to people here in El Paso, or in Deep East Texas, which is as far away as you can be geographically and maybe even culturally, and still be in the same state. When I go to the Rio Grande Valley, Central Texas, the big cities, the small towns that I just described about, there are 3 things that seem to unify us, that we hold in common, that we actually want Texas to be able to do right now. The first is that we want to make sure that the best jobs that are being created in America are found right here in the state of Texas. All of us want to be able to earn a living wage, to work a job that provides purpose and function in our lives. You want to know that you're essential, that but for you, this thing might not be able to happen, or it wouldn't be as good as it is without your presence. That's what we all crave. That is just human nature. And for some of us, we've been lucky in our lives that we found that. For far too many in this state, it's missing. 4 out of 10 working Texans do not make a living wage in this state. And what that means is that they're working a second job or a third shift. It means they're on public assistance. It means they're sleeping in a shelter tonight, or maybe out there on the streets. Even veterans who put their lives on the line for this country, willing to lose them in service to America, find themselves in this same position. And that is despite the best efforts of our county judge, who's been fighting for those veterans every single day that he's been in office, and even before that. We've got to do better, right? But in a state where the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour still, in a state where women are earning a fraction of what men make for doing the same job, providing the same value in the workplace, in a state where you do not have universal all-day pre-K, and so many parents are at home with their young kids who should be receiving education at that early age, beginning to learn how to read, and those parents free to continue their education, work their jobs, start a business, do whatever they were placed on this planet to do in the first place, they're unable to. We lose $9 billion a year in lost economic opportunity in the state of Texas because we do not have daycare and childcare and preschool for everyone who wants to use it, regardless of their income or their zip code. We need to change that. We also have a challenge in that we don't have the unions and the organized labor that not only fights for better wages and improved working conditions and safety, not just for members, but for everyone in the public, but also provides the necessary training, instruction, and education that allow us to fulfill our true potential. I was at an IBEW hall just last week. And Amy and Henry were with me, and we got to meet these amazing electricians who, most of them were in the 5th year of their apprenticeship. So they've been working for 5 years as an electrician while they learn how to become a better electrician every year. And one of these young guys, Tony, told Amy and me, he said, Beto, you keep talking about a job. This is a career for me. When I get up in the morning, I cannot wait to go into work. I cannot wait to come down to this union hall and learn how I can become a better electrician. And yes, after 5 years, I'm making $60,000 at a minimum, and it only climbs from there. But I have that purpose in my life that I have been missing before, and I'm learning every day, and I'm getting better. And we could just see the excitement coming off of this guy. And it was infectious. And I don't know that Henry's not going to become an electrician in a few years going forward. But what I also know is that more people need that chance. And whether it's an electrician or a steel worker or a plumber or somebody who's a communications expert with CWA, we've got to create more of these union jobs in the state of Texas so that we have the higher pay, so that we have the education, so that we have the pride and purpose and function in our lives that's missing so far, and so that when we create jobs in Texas, they are high-paying jobs of high value with high skills. So that's one thing. I think most of us can agree on that, right? Great jobs in the state of Texas. Second thing, our 3 kids are at El Paso High, Wiggs Middle School, and Mesita Elementary. It's a very long Monday morning drop-off routine because we got to do all 3 schools. But we understand as parents, and in my case as someone who went to Mesita Elementary and El Paso High for a little while, the value of public education. Yes, it is learning to read and to write and to add up numbers, but at a time that our democracy is under the greatest attack that we have ever seen, at least in our lifetimes, this is one of the last places where Americans come together, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, income, zip code, any of that stuff, any of those differences over which they would otherwise try to divide us, and understand the basics of being civil to one another, and working in common and finding purpose in what they're doing, and seeing the other not as the enemy, but as your colleague, as your classmate, as a person with whom you're going to collaborate. It is the very foundation of a successful democracy, the thing that we're hoping that we grow up into, right? Making sure that whether you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, we can still find that common ground. And you're not my enemy, because you're my fellow American. And I may not be able to get to my vision of perfection, but if I'm willing to accept good, meaning a consensus between what you want and what I want, your version of perfect and my version of perfect, it's better than what we have right now. I love that, and that's what we learn in that classroom. And those school teachers and counselors and nurses, the cafeteria workers, the school bus drivers, everyone who makes public ed possible is allowing this democracy to survive so far, this attack that we're seeing. But those very teachers are under attack right now in the state. Not the least of which is that we're not paying them a living wage. Half of teachers in Texas work a second job or a third job to continue. They're also required to perform to this STAR test, this high stakes, high pressure, standardized test that in no way, I think, effectively measures the true potential of those kids in that classroom or the performance of a teacher who might be going up against some really serious odds like 2 years of a pandemic that have killed 80,000 Texans, that may have taken the lives of the grandparents of those kids in that classroom, that may have forced their parents out of a job. Those kids are going through some serious stuff right now. And that teacher might literally be the lifeline, literally keeping those kids alive. And we know from listening to teachers and people in the classroom and mental health care professionals that kids are living through extraordinary pressure and trauma right now. And so what we need to be doing is not pushing them out of the profession, and they're leaving by the thousands right now. We need to be paying them enough, $7,500 more as a baseline per year, which gets them up to the national average. We need to replace the STAR test with something that's more diagnostic in nature, that ensures that we're getting resources where they're needed. We're helping the kids who might need a little more instruction or a different kind of teaching methodology. Right now, our standardized testing is so punitive. And so many teachers that I listen to say, Beto, instead of doing the thing I was called to do in the first place, I find myself helping my kids practice for this standardized test. That's kind of like my one function in the classroom right now. And that's not why I got into this. That might explain why so many are leaving right now. If we're willing to do this, I know that we can turn around our system of public ed in Texas, because despite how amazingly smart our kids are, they're really smart here in Texas, and how caring their parents are, and how hardworking those teachers in the classroom are, we're performing at the bottom nationally, academically. Every one of our peer states, from California to Florida, from North Carolina to New York and Illinois, is on the rise, while Texas is on the decline. In the average fourth grade classroom in this state, 7 out of 10 fourth graders cannot read at grade level. And it makes it that much harder for them to graduate from high school, or pursue post-secondary education, or live to their true potential, or fulfill their promise in their lives. So my bet is that if we make public ed the #1 priority, fund it accordingly, treat the teachers as the professionals that they are with the respect that they deserve, we're going to have a much better outcome, and Texas will lead the nation in public ed. So that's issue number 2, great schools. And the third one is one that our county judge brought up, because I bet you he understands this from every perspective in that county courthouse. We are the least insured state in the United States of America right now. That means more people go without the care that they need to live well, to be healthy, to even survive than in any other state. We have folks dying of diabetes, of the flu, of curable cancers in the year of our Lord 2022, in the wealthiest, most powerful country that the world has ever known. We in Texas are the 9th largest economy on earth today. How can this be? How can this be when the federal government says, I will pay you 90 cents on the dollar for the expansion of Medicaid? You can bring 1 million more Texans onto the rolls so that they're well enough to go to school or work a job or raise their families or whatever they want to be able to do. Why would you not take this bargain? And in addition to attracting more medical providers to underserved communities like El Paso, we can also do something that's going to make the county judge really happy. We can lower your property tax bill. Because right now, when that person with diabetes who cannot afford insulin finally succumbs to the suffering that they're undergoing and takes themselves to University Medical Center, their outcomes are not going to be as good as they would have been if they got preventative care. The care itself will be much more expensive. Is it $50,000, $150,000? Who knows? But they are not capable of paying it because they're not insured. But you and I will end up footing the bill through the local property taxes that we pay into the hospital district. Now, if we accepted Medicaid expansion, we can bring those bills down, offer some property tax relief to the people of Paso and throughout the state. I think that's a good bargain. So those are three things that we want to do. Great jobs for anyone who wants to work here in the state of Texas, the best public school system in the United States of America, and expanding Medicaid so more people can get the care that they need. Now, none of those are Republican ideas or Democratic ideas. None of them are defined by a single party. I think they are reflective of common, basic Texas values, right? These are things at a time that this state has never been more polarized, never been more divided, never been more fractured. These are the things that can bring us together. Look, we may not agree on every issue, and certainly no two people ever will. Amy can attest to that, right? 17 years of marriage, and we're not going to agree on everything. But this is the common ground, going back to what we're taught in the classroom in kindergarten. This is the common ground where we can at least begin. And when we win this race, and if we're working with a Republican majority legislature, I defy you to find a Republican who's going to be against great jobs or world-class schools or even expanding Medicaid, which, as good a job as it's going to do for El Paso, is going to help those red rural communities where we've seen 24 hospitals closed down since 2005, more than any other place in the state of Texas. This is how we get the job done. This is the example I take from El Paso, where we define ourselves not in partisan terms or by our differences, but by the common good that we want to do together. So, when you leave this meeting, and when you go home and you talk to your spouse or your child or your parent, your colleague on Monday, your classmate at UTEP, and they say, what is this Beto guy all about? I know you went to hear him on Sunday. Say, look, he's all about great jobs, world-class schools, and the ability to see a doctor. Not only are those the things that will allow us to realize our potential as a state, I'm confident that's how we bring people in to this election, because this race is ours to lose. Let me leave you with this last fact. When we ran together in 2018, we lost to Ted Cruz by 216,000 votes. That was about 2.6% of the votes cast. 216,000 votes. Now check this out. In El Paso in 2020, 195,000 people who were eligible to vote in the most important presidential election since 1864 did not cast a ballot. 195,000. Since 2020, 40,000 more have newly registered and come on to the roll. So that's something like 236,000 people who are eligible here in El Paso. We are just one of the 254 counties in this state, and we have enough votes to make up the gap by which we lost in 2018. The margin of victory is right here in El Paso, Texas. So, this one's on us. No one's riding to the rescue. No one's going to deliver it for us. If we're willing to get out there and listen to and talk with our fellow El Pasoans at their doors, over the phone, however you want to volunteer, I promise you, we will win this race. The judge said it himself. We have everything we need to make this happen. The only question is whether there are going to be enough people who will do enough of the work to bring it to pass. And if we do, not only do we achieve those three big things, we get past the pettiness, the cruelty, the incompetence, the corruption that defines so much of the leadership of this state right now at this moment. A government that would ban reproductive health care for women will be replaced by one that trusts every woman to make her own decisions about her own body every single time. A state government right now, a state government that wants you to turn into parents of transgender kids to prosecute them for child abuse is going to be replaced by one that is going to fix child protective services and look out for the 30,000 kids in our foster care system and make sure they have a real champion at the end of the day. And lastly, a state government and a government that has made Texas the hardest place in America in which to vote, in which to register, in which to participate in our politics is going to be replaced by one that removes every obstacle for every eligible citizen. So Democrat, Republican alike, you are able to freely cast your ballot ensure that your voice is counted and that you can decide the outcome, not just of these elections, but the future of this state going forward. That's what we're going to do when we win this election. So, thank you all for coming out here today. Looking forward to your questions. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Cynthia Cano, class of 1990, Andrews High School. She's going to bring you the microphone. If you raise your hand, she'll take it to you. 1990.
All right, I will make my way to you. If you raise your hand, be here first.
Hi, my name is Kristen. I actually am a staff reporter with the Prospector, and I just have a quick question. Because you're talking about numbers with basically voting and getting everybody registered to vote. How do you think that's going to be affected, though, with the new redistricting that's going into play that we're kind of discussing right now?
Yeah, you have a system in Texas. No, can we turn this down just a little bit? A system in Texas whereby members of Congress are choosing their own voters instead of the other way around, right? And choosing congressional districts that are less and less competitive going forward, and it gives people fewer reasons to get out there and vote. If the contest is decided months before November, then why would you get out there? Luckily, you've got competitive races further down the ballot in many of these places for county commissioner, for state rep, and you have a very competitive race at the top of the ticket, at least for governor, and you may have them for some other top of the ticket races. And if you have a campaign that's willing to go literally to every part of the state and listen to everyone, you can bring the people in. And when that campaign has, as we do now, 59,000 volunteers who signed up to pick up a clipboard and knock on the doors of those voters and not write them off, not take them for granted, not assume that they're going to turn out just because they're eligible or registered, but give them a reason to do that in the first place, we can overcome those odds. But I don't want to minimize the threat that we're under, because when you compound these gerrymandered districts with 700 polling place closures across the state of Texas, one ballot drop-off box per county in the midst of a pandemic, the most onerous voter ID laws in the country. Back when we had a license to carry program to carry a firearm in the state, you could use that license to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you could not use your student ID at the University of Texas at El Paso to prove who you are at the polling place. We've got a lot to overcome. And then on top of all of that, you have the the election bill that was passed and signed last year that made it even harder, with ballot rejection rates in some counties of over 10%. So these volunteers, meaning everyone here who's willing to sign up, have to be the difference. No DOJ, no Supreme Court, no president, they're not coming to help us out. I wish they would, they're not. It's on us. But I like those odds, and I like those terms. I believe in us. I know that we can overcome this. And Texas has been the site of the worst voter suppression in American history, not just in 2021 and 2022, but El Paso, Texas, and the rest of the state were home to the all-white primary from 1923 to 1944, and it was an El Pasoan, Dr. Lawrence Nixon, who founded the first chapter of the NAACP in this community in 1914, who was able to overcome that voter suppression and break the white primary. We can break the voter suppression that we see right now if we're willing to do that work, but it's up to us. It's on all of us. Thank you.
All right, I'll make my way to you.
Hi, do you recognize me?
Hey, yes, from Alameda Street. Yes.
Alameda Business Association.
Yes.
Beto.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. When TxDOT was rebuilding Alameda Street, you got in touch with me when I was on the city council, and we would meet in your business.
Because I want to. Okay, let me tell you something that before I speak. Okay. Okay. My name is Efrain Sobse. I'm a Vietnam veteran. Okay. I like this guy now because he's almost like me. Okay. One time, I was at the VA, and this veteran, he was asking for his pills, okay, medications. So he started throwing elbows all the way. I did that when I came from Vietnam. So he knocked out my 14 teeth. So the air, goes for places sometimes you guys don't understand. Okay, now, the securities, because I'm a kind of popular over there at the VA, I was in charge of just 275,000 troopers that are gonna put them back to the VA because I'm gonna open my own business again. My own business. Okay, so the security guards, they knocked him to the floor. And then when he came back from the flashback, he said, "Here, I hit you, sir." "No, you need him. But you got blood, you know." "No, I didn't like it, but they hit me." "Are you sure I hit you?" "No, you did not hit me. I allowed people when I had the flashbacks when I was in Vietnam, but you hit me." And then the securities from Mr. Salcedo, "Do you want us to take him to jail?" I said, "No. Listen, let him go. Go for the doctor. Put him in jail. The doctor, not him." That's the way I am. Now, he forgot some things. I'm the president of Alameda Business Association. And I want you to write this down. There's not gonna be no more for people in El Paso, Texas, in 5 years. It's gonna come from my business. The money's gonna come from my business, like in the 90s and early 2000s. From my business. Write it down. If you ever put people, call me. You can call me a liar, whatever. Now, taking people to voting. See, when I was there a long time ago, they gave us 1 penny on the dollar. 1 penny. When we push it, with all the politicians that at that time, they were afraid. Why? Because they were riding good cars and everything. They were afraid of the politicians over there. I'm not afraid of nobody. Nobody. And I'm gonna see especially Kamala. Because Latinos were invisible. They don't see us. You see a picture over here for any Latino? Okay, the people with business who didn't get the PPP, the West Business, the Pay Protection Program, which is Beto, it was a slap for my poor people. I will defend my poor people. I need to go my poor people. So, if you got, let's say 3, with the taxes W2s, or you are a contractor or something like that, they are pushing me to business. So, and I don't like that. Okay, hold on. You can call me anytime. You have business. My phone number is a public phone number. 915-630-1286. And I check your income tax, and now the least that I can get you, that's $75,000 to $1,625. And now I'm not a mercenary. And now I'm a mercenary. Okay, so I'm not going to charge you a penny. Get my phone number, I got more than 80 calls a day. I return all the calls.
Thank you, Mr. Salcedo. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, next question.
Thank you.
Let's see, if you raise your hand, I will come to you right over here.
I'll tell you, as we're getting the microphone to this next person, when I first met Mr. Salcedo, not only was he running the Alameda Business Association and running his own business, but I mentioned that TxDOT was rebuilding Alameda Street, and it was functionally preventing any business from getting the customers they needed. People literally could not drive up to the businesses, they couldn't use the sidewalks. This guy out of his own pocket was keeping those businesses alive, paying their rents, making sure that they did not go out of business. So, really good guy. Served his country in Vietnam. Amazing human being. Thank you, Mr. Salcedo. Thank you.
Every month.
All right, we're going to take this next question.
I have several, but you spoke about the numbers as far as the voters here in El Paso and our very low numbers. I've always wondered why the El Paso Democratic Party doesn't run campaigns like Vote El Paso Vote, doing it in Spanish and English, really so that they understand the importance of their vote. We don't have that here. And I don't know, I know that you've been going door to door, but are you really getting the response you need to get people to vote?
It's a good question, and I'll tell you what, we did something like this in 2018, and we would not only go to the contested counties, Collin County and Denton County, North Texas, that were supposed to be trending blue or at least purple. Not only did we go to the really deep red counties like King County, which voted for Donald Trump 96% in the 2016 election, but we would talk to voters in El Paso County and in Hidalgo County and in Bexar County, the kind of places that Democrats, frankly, to your point, had taken voters for granted. You voted for Democrats before, you're going to vote for Democrats again. You're Mexican American, we got you in the back. If the great sin of Republicans in the modern age was trying to disenfranchise voters of color, the sin committed by Democrats was to take those same voters for granted. And so to your point, if we were willing to show up with people and assume nothing, I have to earn your vote. I don't get it just because I'm a Democrat, just because I'm from El Paso. I've got to listen to you, and that's why we're doing this town hall here, and I've got to work for it. I will tell you, we have representatives from the El Paso County Democratic Party today. I think in years past, we had some problems in taking voters here for granted. This new generation of leadership is really getting after it, and they just announced yesterday that El Paso will be home to the 2024 State Democratic Convention right here in the city. So we're really excited about them and work they're doing.
You were talking about schools, and I realize that there's problems as far as assessments and all of that, but you might be hit with also, we have career pathways now, and that really is helping the kids make decisions or even experience what it is to go in this particular route, whether it be medical, electrician, plumbing, it goes the gamut now, coding. So you may be hit with that because it's a very positive move that Texas has made as far as the children now having career pathways. Are you aware of that?
I am, and I think that El Paso, in many ways, is leading in this, where you have some early college high schools where at 18, you're walking across that stage getting your high school diploma and your associate's degree.
Right.
And you have the certification you need to start work right at that age, and not for $7.25 an hour or $10 an hour, but for really competitive, high wages. We worry about keeping young people in El Paso. This is a way to keep young people in El Paso. So I like that, and I want to see more of that here and across the state.
So how are you going to also do one thing that Republicans are very good at is taking and saying, well, Beto's a socialist. Beto, Beto is going to ruin Texas. Beto is going to, you hear it over and over. How are you going to argue that point?
Ultimately, I think the choice is all of ours as to whether we'll be motivated and moved by fear, or are you going to be scared into voting for or against somebody, or whether you're going to be moved by your ambitions and your aspirations. What are the big, great things that we want to do together? And when those attacks come, just to arm you with some of the responses, of the two people who are running for governor right now, only one, and I'll give you a clue, it's me, has started a small business, has hired people in this community for high wage, high skill technology jobs, has met a payroll every single week for 15 years, never missed a payroll, knows what it's like to go to the bank and try to get a loan and get rejected and go find capital in other ways. Look, there are ways to improve the capitalism that we have in America, especially here in the state of Texas, but I understand its power as well. And the last thing that I want to do is, turn Texas into Venezuela or whatever the governor will try to scare you into thinking. So
it's looked upon, I'm sorry, in a negative connotation. If you say, veterans, you go to the VA, is that a socialist program? I think it's more of an education versus,
yes.
do you understand what I'm saying? If you could educate the people with that word so it's not used in a negative connotation. That's all I'm saying, is that sometimes we take that for granted because it's looked upon in negatively as opposed to what it really means. When we're saying to expand Medicaid, people don't realize that is a social program. It's not socialist, but social program.
And Medicaid, as an example, came from nowhere else but Texas. It was our Texas President, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who signed that into law in the summer of 1965. And it's crazy that Texas in the year 2022 won't accept the expansion of the program that we started here in the first place. So, and listen, just so that we know, every one of our border states, with the exception, I guess, of Chihuahua, but Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico have all expanded Medicaid, and 3 of the 4 had Republican governors at the time. So this is not only not socialist, it's not even just the Democratic Party, this is a common basic value that we have as Americans and as Texans that we just need to get back to. So.
All right, here's our next comment right over here.
Well, just really quick, I'm actually the Democratic Party chair-elect. Michael Baca, so I would love to get some information out here to everybody else who wants to help to get out the vote. I would love to get your contact info as well, next to knocking on doors with Beto, but knocking on doors to get everyone out, especially in the competitive elections that we will have here locally, because we are planning to do a big, giant, coordinated campaign to make sure that El Paso meets those numbers that the congressman met. So I'd love to meet you after we're done, grab the numbers so we can work together. But also, I'd love to work with all of us here as we move forward. So thank you so much. Sorry my voice is hoarse, as the congressman mentioned. We won the convention bid yesterday, so super excited. Well, love to help you all. Again, my name is Michael Baca. I'm the Democratic County Chair-elect for El Paso County. So great meeting you all.
Also, if you need to get registered to vote, they have a table back there. They can register you to vote. So if you are not, please go visit the table back there. She's waving her hand, and they can get you all registered. Thank you, Mike.
Hey, Beto, Richard Hanena. Getting out young voters and helping with property taxes. I see one thing that can knock out both: legalizing cannabis. This Friday, New Mexico starts recreational sales. They're going to see billions of dollars 15 minutes from here. That's money that could be going into our city, our stores, our coffers, getting property taxes down. We're going to see it, right?
We are. Richard, there is, so Dr. Stout knows this. There's some pretty profound poetic justice in the question you just asked, because El Paso was the first city in the United States of America to criminalize marijuana. And it did so to try to stoke, to the woman's question earlier, to stoke fear of Mexicans and Mexican immigrants, because the thinking went 110 years ago that when Mexicans use marijuana, they become lustful and murderous and commit crimes and do all these things that Donald Trump warned us about when he was running for president in 2016, right? Marijuana was the pretext to stop Mexicans and Mexican Americans in this community, to frisk them, to see if they had any of this substance on them, and to put them in jail. More than 100 years ago, we started the trend that then caught like wildfire throughout the Mountain West and in the big cities, until by the 1930s, it's criminalized federally. Now, almost every other state, except for Texas, has legalized it for medicinal purposes. That veteran who came back from Vietnam, who has PTSD, who does not want to take an opioid and understands that cannabis better than anything else will relieve his symptoms, he's a criminal in the eyes of the law in this state if he tries to buy any of it. And we are still putting away people of color disproportionately because Texans of all races and ethnicities and backgrounds use marijuana at the same rate. But only some, typically black and brown, are stopped, frisked, incarcerated upon release, have to check a box saying they've got that conviction, which makes it harder to get a job or get a student loan. We spend, all of us together, $500 million a year locking people up for possession of the substance. And to the gentleman's point, we lose, conservatively speaking, about $500 million a year in revenue if we were to tax it the same way that other states tax legal cannabis there. Now listen, this should go without saying, but I'm just going to say it as the father of a 15 and a 13 and 11-year-old. I am not advocating that anybody use marijuana. I'm especially not advocating that young people use marijuana. We know that when a young person uses marijuana, from the medical evidence that we have, it's not good for their brain, which is still developing at the time. But right now, with marijuana being sold in the black market, one of the fastest growing markets for marijuana is on a middle school playground. Because drug dealers don't ID, they don't care about the consequences or implications, and when it's not regulated and controlled, we have no ability, really, to keep it out of the hands of our kids. I think legalizing it, regulating it, controlling its sale, not only do all the things that we just talked about, but we give ourselves a better chance of keeping it out of the hands, and out of the bloodstream, and out of the brains of those young kids. So that's why I support this. Anyhow, thank you for asking.
Thank you. My name is Justin Keppel. I'm also, like a friend, a veteran, but I'm not going to ask a VA question. Additionally, I am a clinical psychologist practicing here in El Paso, and I'm not going to ask a mental health question. To get to be a psychologist, I had to get a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate degree. I'm going to be paying off student loans the rest of my life, which I accept at this point. And I'm not even going to ask a, education system the payment question. At the end of the day, I'm a father, and my daughter goes to Wicks Middle School as well. I've seen you in the parent pool there before. The most concerning thing I've seen recently is the attempt to censor education, censor certain books. Almost promoting an American mythology that sets this particular view that certain people want to perpetuate to kind of block our children from learning the true history, which I am very concerned about, because if we don't learn from our history, we are doomed to repeat it. So I'd like to speak a little bit on your plan as governor, what to do about that.
That was a great question. Thank you for asking. Thank you for your service to our country and your service to our community now. It's interesting, Amy and I, my wife, we literally were having this conversation this morning. And I'm tempted to just give you the politically pat answer, but I'm going to run the risk of just telling you what we said. We were talking about, and Amy, you jump on the mic if I leave anything. In fact, do you want to take this one? No? She was listening to an interview with Margaret Atwood, who's from Canada originally. And Margaret Atwood was talking about how growing up in Canada, she was envious of the myths, the foundational myths that we had here in America. How we started, we're this pure people who have always valued democracy and personal freedom and liberty and justice and all these wonderful things that do have real value, that are binding to us, and that we refer back to in the fights and the struggles that we enter into. So Lawrence Nixon, who I mentioned, who broke the all-white primary starting in 1923, ultimately in 1944, he called back to those foundational documents from the 18th century about how we're all created equal and that we'll be treated equally under the law. And he's like, hey guys, how come I'm black and I can't vote in the state of Texas? That doesn't sound equal to me. And that's what we said we were all about, so let's get after it, let's do it. And he persevered in that fight, I think in some part fueled by that foundational story that we told ourselves about. But that we run the risk when we accept it as truth without questioning, or without the additional details like the fact that when we set up this democracy, only white men with property were able to vote. And that those white men with property considered many of the black men and women and black children who were in this country to be their property at the time. And that was literally enshrined within the compact and the consensus that developed the Constitution, which we continue to go back to as we were watching the confirmation hearings of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson this past week. When we talk about the Texas Revolution, man, we are so proud of those guys who fought to their death at the Alamo. It was an extraordinary Herculean task. It was more actually David and Goliath, right, against the Mexican army that was coming in. But we don't like to talk about the fact that many of them were slaveholders and owned other people. And we're fighting against a government in Mexico that had abolished slavery. And in part, we're fighting to be able to keep the institution of slavery in the state of Texas. Listen, I don't have to judge it. I don't have to comment on it. I don't have to give you my opinion. Those are the facts. And if the people of that time in Texas were strong enough to live under that system, if Lawrence Nixon was strong enough to fight the all-white primary, if Thelma White, who graduated from Douglas High School in Texas and integrated Texas Western College in 1954 at the age of 18 was strong enough to do that, I think our kids in middle school at Wiggs, at El Paso High, wherever they attend in the state of Texas, are strong enough to learn the true story of this country. We're going to make better decisions as a result. And we don't have to lose, I don't think, this may be naive, I don't think we have to lose those foundational stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves in the mix. I think we have always strived for freedom and justice and liberty, imperfectly always. And I feel like by and large we had made progress up until recent years when you began to roll back so many of these freedoms. I mean, thinking about Margaret Atwood in The Handmaid's Tale and the fact that Texas has outlawed abortion, put a $10,000 bounty in the back of anyone who assists any woman in making her own reproductive health care decisions. I think that begs learning the history of reproductive health care rights in Roe versus Wade, which was decided 49 years ago. I want my sons and my daughter to know that history as well. It helps them understand this current moment. And we're a proud, bold, strong people. We can take it. We know we can take our history. I want to make sure that it is taught fairly and freely in our schools going forward. Thanks for asking me that question.
Hi, thank you. It's great to connect, and I just wanted to let you know that my Irish ancestor came to the United States in 1758. Her name was Catherine Gaffney, so I definitely understand that.
We're probably related.
You touched upon earlier in your speech about the reputation of Texas. You know, I moved here in 2008. I thought, like many people across the world, that it was sort of backwoods and hick and all of these stereotypes. And what I found as I've lived here all this time is that it's filled with amazing people. I've built beautiful friendships. I have great family connections here, and I'm a small business owner. What is your plan for really helping the rest of the United States as well as the world see us in a different light, really see what we're actually about here?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to get this perspective from you, from what you expected to find in Texas and what you actually discovered once you were here. And I see that on a daily basis as I travel the state. I've been to every one of the counties, and I'm struck by our extraordinary diversity. You see it in Houston, Texas, right, which is the most diverse city in the United States of America. In the HISD school system, they speak like 120 different languages. There are more people who speak Vietnamese in Houston than any other city on the planet outside of Vietnam. That's happening right here in the state of Texas. But it's not just big cities. All too often, we use rural and white as synonyms. Rural Texas is white Texas. It is not. I can tell you from visiting rural Texas. Rural Texas is Anglo, but it's Mexican American, it is South Asian, it is African American. It is incredibly diverse. And that diversity and the genius that comes from it, out of many, one, the fact that we are people from the planet over who have chosen Texas and made it better by our very presence, and have extraordinary ideas and creativity. We're creating jobs, we're creating art, we're creating political movements. All of that should be reflected in our leadership. But it comes back to this question I got about democracy. when you have members of Congress who choose their voters, when you distrust the electorate so that you make it harder for them to register to vote or participate in elections, you're not going to reflect that diversity. And when that voter suppression is specifically targeted at black and brown voters, at voters with disabilities, at the very old, at the very young, you compound the problems that you just described that people see from the outside. I mean, right now we're making headlines around the world for all the wrong reasons, right? And yet there are so many good stories here in Texas. And that's why I make this campaign about the things that can bring us together. Jobs, great schools, the ability to see a doctor. There's plenty for us to debate and maybe even argue and fight over peacefully and civilly. But let's start with the things that we can actually do and make some headlines for some good reasons going forward. And then I'm confident that on issues like reproductive health care, where I'm never going to try to argue you out of what you believe. That's a deeply held personal belief. I am going to try to find the common ground on an issue like that. And I'd say, look, you may define yourself as pro-life. I may say I am pro-choice. I bet we can both agree that this attack on the rights of women in Texas not only has made it illegal to get an abortion, but it's made it harder to get a cervical cancer screening or reproductive health care help of any kind, or just to see a doctor. And it has exacerbated a problem that has made Texas a maternal mortality crisis center, and 3 times as deadly for black women. Nobody wants that, right? And we could probably find some common ground on expanding access to care, or at least understanding how badly harmed Texas women are by things that other people might think are in the best interests of the people of this state. So I want to make sure that we elevate great stories, we do things that we can do in common, and then when we disagree, we argue, we talk about what we want to achieve, and then we find some way to move forward, not allowing the perfect to become the enemy of the good. I think that's the way to get past this moment that has defined Texas by our differences and our divisions. I know that we can do better. Thanks for asking.
To your left.
Beto, my friend. Let's go, Beto, okay? Yes. Welcome home. Welcome home. Hey, Beto. So, following up on the cannabis question, all the smart states around us, you know, California, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, those are smart states, okay? Let's make it smart for the state of Texas. Let's vote for Beto. Yeah. What are the tax revenues from the sale of pot going to do for property tax owners?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, we would save $500 million on incarceration and arrest costs and the criminal justice involvement of those who've been arrested for possession of a substance that's legal in all those states you just mentioned. Plus, we get another $500 million in tax revenue. That's $1 billion to the positive. You could put that into public schools. You could give that to property taxpayers back as property tax relief. It really changes what is possible in the state of Texas. When you add to that, bringing in $10 billion a year in Medicaid expansion and making corporations pay their fair share in property taxes, you could bring up about $5 billion just from that. You really have some resources to work with. And again, to the judge's interest, I know he wants to lower the property tax burden here in El Paso County. We can do that while also freeing up resources for those underpaid public school teachers, or keeping more of those rural hospitals open, or extending broadband internet in the parts of Texas that don't have it today. There are so many things that we could do going forward if we just made the right choices right now, and then stop spending on the wrong ones. This current governor has spent $3 billion over the last year trying to make you afraid of us, of our connection with Mexico. $3 billion to build a section of a wall, to activate 10,000 members of the Guard who are part of a solution in search of a problem. 4 of them, unfortunately, have taken their lives since this deployment began 5 months ago. They cannot do anything constitutionally to change the dynamic at the border. We should bring them home to their families, save the taxpayers some money in the bargain. There's a lot more that we could do if we made good decisions and changed our priorities to reflect those of the people of Texas. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
We're all the way in the back in the middle, and although this is going to be our last question, we're going to stay afterwards, and we'll get a chance to say hi if you would like to stay afterwards.
My name is Juan Mancias. I'm the tribal chair for the Carizo-Comecrudo tribe of Texas. We were one of the largest tribes in this area, and I constantly go to these things and I hear that we never get mentioned. So we're the original people in Texas. We don't hear about it. And you're actually not prepared for it. And my question is, when are we going to, or if you do get, when you get elected, I'll put it that way, when you get elected, what are you going to do about bringing those people that are originally from Texas together to be able to protect who they are? Because we're not activists and we're not protesters. We're trying to protect our language because it's alive. We're trying to protect our sacred sites, our ceremonial sites. And of course, we're actually wanting to build our own college for immersion so people can understand more of what happened with the real history of Texas.
Right.
You know, why they call me a lot of times Indio Patrajada. And it's really a sad thing. And until they're ready to hear the real story, I don't think we can change the history yet. And they for everybody, and even the politicians. Right? Thank you.
First of all, I really appreciate you being here and having the courage to say all this and to say, you know, if you're in a position of power and public trust, what are you going to do? Holding me accountable in front of the people that I want to serve. I want to tell you that I don't want to begin that conversation 7 months from now after this election. I'd love to have that conversation with you right now. And instead of me defining or describing the terms of how the state of Texas can do the right thing finally, I'd love to listen to you and be your partner in doing that. But I want to acknowledge as the truth what you just said, both in terms of being the original people, the lack of justice over the centuries since you first had European conquest and settlement in this area, and the ongoing indignity of the state of Texas not recognizing the rights of Native people here in the state of Texas. I'm very familiar with the Tiguas back from when I was on city council and in Congress, who are petitioning the state to be able to have the right to do what other nations are able to do all across this country. And in fact, what the state of Texas does when it comes to the kinds of enterprises that are legal here in the state of Texas for some, but not legal for others. I'd love to have a deeper understanding of those other outstanding issues, from language to higher education that you just described, and anything else that you want to make sure I'm aware of now as a candidate, so that we're ready to hit the ground running after November once we win. So thank you for being here, and I'm going to ask Cynthia to make sure that we have a chance to talk today before the meeting. Make sure we do that. Okay. I want to thank everybody for making some time, for coming out here today. I especially want to thank Jessica and her children for being with us right now. I want to thank the judge for his leadership, his kind words as he introduced us. And I want to thank everyone for making some time while the Final Four was going on here today to be part of your government and to be part of this election. And I hope to sign up and to help us win this thing in November. Thank you all very much. Very grateful to you.